You are listening to Revealing Real Estate Podcast, where we dive into getting over your fear of taking risk in real estate and making money while you sleep. I'm Nico Pedizano, your host and real estate guru with over 20 years of experience. It's time to get real. All right, today we're going to have a wonderful guest who's going to be hopping onto the show for a second time. He's going to be our first repeat that we've had come on, but with a lot of demand asking to discuss a lot more about commercial industrial space. I don't think there's going to be anybody better than Paul Miceli, who's the CEO of Vanguard Realty. As people know, he specializes in commercial land, residential real estate. So Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, buddy.
Yeah,
How are you?
Good. Glad to have you on.
Good.
You're really sought after. A lot of people were like, "Hey, get Paul back on the show." So we needed to get Paul back on the show
Well,
because
that's great. I had a lot of fun last time, so hopefully it goes well again.
I'm sure it will. Listen, we a lot of things we talk about here is, residential, of course, right? And we talk about how we can get millennials into the market. We talked about how people that are currently have their primary residence, how they can leverage their properties to get into real estate and continue building their wealth through that. I'm sure you're a big believer in owning real estate and investing into real estate and building that wealth around real estate. Even we've hit the elderly and down the baby boomers and how they can start leveraging their properties to continue still investing, because I don't think you're ever too late to get into the game of real estate.
Absolutely not.
But one of the main reasons I want to get you on into the show was to discuss the commercial side of things, because I think we need, and you specialize in that field. For people that don't know Paul, if you drive around the GTA, this guy's pretty much got market share covered. One of the biggest real estate commercial brokerages around right now, and he has a really big resume behind him. So, Paul, I just want to dabble into kind of what we're seeing on the residential side of things. We're seeing that the market is really jumping up back to what it was, last year of June. We're probably back to June prices of last year, and we're seeing that there's a big market surge. There's a lack of supply. Prices have increased tremendously. We are selling homes in 7 days, all in multiple offers. How is it on the industrial space, commercial space?
Okay, on the leasing side of things, I think it's very similar to what you just mentioned on your res listings. We're getting into multiple offers. There's not enough space for what the market needs. So there's a demand issue, there's a supply issue, and there's a high demand. So we're getting higher numbers than normal. So the numbers seem to keep climbing up, somewhere around that 5% range per year. So, in other words, when you do a 5-year deal, we start at a number, and usually there's 5% escalations, which, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's getting very expensive for tenants, and I don't see that trend changing. So if we bring 2 or 3 million square feet to a market like Toronto, which is hardly anything, we eat up the square footage before the time period that's needed for more space. So in other words, it's just, we just can't keep up with the demand. So going forward, to answer your question, the sales side of things, again, we don't have any supply. So whenever a building comes out, or a plaza, or an assembly of some kind, they seem to bring in very, very high numbers, higher than normal.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point. So if we have a tenant now that's been in a building, let's say, and we'll just give it an average of 15,000 square foot building, and we'll talk about the 905 right now, and he's been in there back probably 5 years ago, where his lease is now coming up for renewal.
He's a little shocked.
He's a little shocked.
Absolutely.
Right? So the rental rates were probably hitting $10, $11, probably 5 years ago. Now I'm hearing from, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, we just did, me personally, actually, I just did a 5-year deal in the Vaughan Business Park of Pine Valley and Highway 7 area. Mm-hmm. And we did a 5-year deal on 15,000 square feet, starting at $21 and going to $27 on 5 years.
Yeah, and which is a big jump.
Yeah.
Which is a big jump. Number one for landlords, right? Because the landlords are
More than
loving it.
double, Nick. It's more than double where it was 5 years ago.
It's almost more than double what it was 5 years ago. So how does a tenant now recover from all that? Because if you're
Well,
paying double the amount of
let
space,
me ask you something. All your consumer goods that you buy every day, do you see how much inflation is?
I hear you. It's
and
not cheap.
and warehousing is a big part of that, right? Of those costs. So
Yes.
they're raising all their numbers not because everyone's like, oh, how are they doing and how they do it. Well, their costs have increased, and rent is a big issue on where their increases have happened. And like I said, in a lot of cases, it's more than 2.5 times of what they were paying 5 years ago.
A lot of times I preach selling real estate is not always the best option, or it should be your last option if you ever own a property, right? Rich people don't like to sell. People that are very wealthy like to maintain their properties, leverage their properties as much as they can. Sometimes I do believe that there are certain situations where you want to maybe remove some chips off the table. Are you finding that one of the biggest reasons landlords today, or you're finding a lack of supply in the sale of industrial buildings specifically, even in units, like smaller end units, right? Even some commercial spacing. But I'm going to talk about specifically the bigger scale of industrial buildings.
Like freestanding buildings.
Freestanding buildings.
Yeah.
You don't find any today landlords that want to relinquish them.
Well, the big issue on why is, okay, it's really a two-part answer. Okay?
Yeah.
Number one, the way our taxes work in this country, the capital gains taxes are very significant when you sell a property. So, families tend to either move them generation to generation.
Right.
They like the income side of it, so they keep them. The other part of it is, what do I do with the money? I can't go out and say, hey, I'm going to go down the street and buy a bigger industrial building or a smaller industrial building for that fact. There's no supply. So now they don't know what to do with the money. So it's not like they're reaching out and saying, hey, I'm going to sell this for X amount of dollars. I'm going to go to double the size space, spend this amount of money, and this is going to bring me this amount of income. They can't do that.
Right.
So it's actually, it's an issue in our business at the moment because we can, when you don't have supply, it's very difficult for some young brokers getting into the business that they just can't, they don't have enough deals to work on because there isn't any.
And there's not enough to go around for all the amount of licenses that have been given out throughout throughout a
that's
REIA
another
right
thing. That's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation on its own. It's just
we need an hour just for that.
But when we started out in the business, I think you started out in 2020. I was licensed in 2004. You were licensed in 2002, I believe.
Yeah, something like that.
Similar to that, right?
Yeah.
So I think you were a couple years in front of me when we ended up joining forces back in the day. But at the time, on the commercial side of things, there was a lot more inventory. The housing market, we were talking 40, 50,000.
If you remember, because you used to dabble in it a little bit when we first started, vacancies were at around 25%.
Correct.
Well, vacancies today are 0.05%.
It's a huge change.
So it's a huge.
So we're seeing a lot of similarities between the residential side and industrial side. Just right now, real estate, there's a shortage supply across the board. Whether you're being residential or you're being on the commercial side of things, there's a lack of supply. Tenants are having difficulties to get into product because if I'm a tenant, and I just want to go back to what we were discussing previously, if I'm a tenant and I've gotten rent 5 years ago at a discounted price, we'll look at it, $10 a foot on average, and now I got to make that transition into making a move and pay these new rental rates, plus the cost of moving, which is very expensive as we know. It becomes unaffordable for somebody to still now operate their business, right?
And the fact there's nowhere to move to,
and the fact there's nowhere to move to.
So it all gets back into supply and demand, right?
But there's and I think I think this comes from channels from municipalities. And especially within the Vaughan municipality, I think they didn't.
That's a great point. Actually,
they didn't plan correctly enough to
there's too
build more industrial parks.
Yeah, I don't think they foresee this coming as quick as it did. It all ties into this. Back in the 80s, 90s, Southern Ontario was a heavy manufacturing area.
Right.
With all the changes in the U.S. market and a lot of overseas things that were happening, the world got smaller in a sense, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean, yeah.
Right? So a lot of stuff went to China and places like that. So we transformed into an industrial powerhouse of building stuff into a warehousing industrial giant. So warehousing is different. You need the space.
And it's such a huge
And that's
business
what,
today, warehousing.
there's been referrals of Toronto or the GTA area to be the warehouse of the world. And that's really what we've become, especially the North American market. And if you see what's going on, I don't know, I know that you do a lot of stuff in Vaughan, but if you look at the Bolton area, did you see all those big warehouses? They're putting up 1 million square feet at a time, 50-foot clear buildings just for storage, right?
Just for warehousing.
Amazon, all the big guys are there.
It's a huge market
today.
today.
And there's I know Lululemon. I think everybody knows Lululemon, right?
Yeah.
The tracksuits, the tracksuit guys, the workout wear.
They're big.
They just did a 1 million square foot deal in Caledon as well. So what I'm getting at is this: space is gonna, if we don't open up, like what you say, the municipalities don't open up more of it, we're gonna constantly have this problem. Now, and I don't, if it's not just a one thing, like maybe one sector of the market starts to hurt and then it'll free up some space, but it won't be enough.
Yes.
So the only way you can catch up is we need to get the municipalities on board to approve more land available quicker. Number one, quicker. Get it ready, get it done. And then we need a bunch of landlords that are in the industrial building sector to put up a lot of space. And then, because you can't hover at this 0.5%. And if you remember, I think our first show that we did in January, we talked about that vacancy, remember?
But and we also talked about how fast, and we were when we had you on the show, we were in a down market, right?
Right.
So the market was really trending, and everybody was kind of all up in arms. What was going to happen with the real estate market? There was so many hypothetical guesses to what was going to happen. Some people say we're going to be in this for 2 years, and me and you talked about it significantly. If people go back to, I think it was episode 2 or 3 that you were on, we said that this can spin over really fast just because of the shortage of supply and the amount of immigration that's actually come to this country, the amount of big corporations, because we're still seeing a lot of American companies come in here.
Well, right? They get a good, look at their dollar versus ours.
Correct, yeah.
There's a big advantage.
There's a big advantage, right? They're saving 30 to 35% just on their dollar by moving their production here. Or their warehousing here.
And you're buying in the 10th largest city in North America. Think about that.
Yeah.
So the population that we have and the growth we have, they're very attracted to it.
Yeah.
Especially if you can make 40% on it. And that's where they're at, almost 40% more with their money.
I think one of the biggest key issues that I see or I foresee, and again, we're going to talk about this from a municipal problem, right? And I'll talk about even the city of Vaughan because that's kind of where, it's my backyard. I don't think they are doing enough to expedite this land development process. And what's happening right now, because the market shift of what happened where prices really dropped, builders just said, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to sit on the sidelines here and I'm not going to develop.
And what's that done to your resale business?
Exactly. It's boomed the resale market, right? And it just created all this demand.
Same thing happened to us.
Same thing in commercial where you're finding
no one's building it.
Nobody's building them.
No.
Right? Why not? And I think municipalities, the governments need to start in all different levels, have to start coming together to meet so that they can start helping developers or incentivizing developers to want to start putting up more of this product.
It's funny you mentioned that. We're doing a development. I think we talked about it. We're doing a new development, small micro bay units with a company called Northbridge.
Yeah, heard of
it. And so they're a private equity fund. And we sold them the land, and now we're going to put up 84,000 square feet of micro bay product.
Nice.
And you wouldn't believe, we haven't really advertised, but I've put it out to a few friends and a couple of select brokers that we deal with, and a few. You wouldn't believe we only have, I think, 41 or 42 units that we were able to sell.
They're going to fly off the shelf.
Yeah, it's just because nobody has it. It's a great product.
Yeah.
Nobody has it. It's in a good location, but this is think about it, in the size of Vaughan, this is pretty well the only new one that I know of coming out.
Right.
So that's and your builders, I think, to your point, they're doing the same thing. They're not putting them all up at the same time anymore.
Yeah.
And they're holding their numbers. So this guy sells, and then the guy down the street opens up, and then he sells, right?
You're right. Yes. And you can't find them, right? And that's the biggest key component, and they're going to sell pretty quick. So if we look at now, so the average price point for an industrial building, right? I just want to get into the sale aspect on it. An industrial building right now, what are you averaging out in the 905?
The last one that I know of that traded, it's a funny story because I had sold this building one time a long time ago.
Yeah.
And now it came to the market again, and it's sold in the Pine Valley Business Park. So we're talking 40-year plus product. So this isn't no 40 clear. We're talking 16 clear, all brick. Let's face it, a little tired, needs some work, right?
Yeah.
That sold for $504 a square foot.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the first time I sold that building, I sold it for $93 a square foot. So it was a good investment for somebody, right?
Well,
So
it was, for sure.
I wish I would have bought it, but
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of people, because I think industrial space is the best investment you
Right.
can make in the real estate
Absolutely.
market.
Absolutely.
In a whole, if you can get to that level where you own industrial buildings, I think there's no better investment in any investment that you can make out there.
Yeah, it's like, like I know the housing you guys, and well as well as I do, housing people have made big money in the last 10 or 15 years for sure. And then in the industrial side as well, it's remember small micro bay units? Like I remember, my family owned some. They were very difficult things for the longest time. You couldn't make any money. Remember, they were
But the rates would stay like that for
$450
years.
a square foot.
Yeah.
And they never moved.
I think they went up to when I
$650.
$650 at best.
Yeah.
Right? But
I think we sold one for your dad a long time ago, right?
remember that was my first ever listing at the time.
Yeah, I remember. Do you remember? See, I remember.
Yeah.
And it was in that Pine Valley Business Park.
And I had no business. I just got my license. That was in 2004.
And I helped you. Me and you did it. And think about it. You're like, wow, this thing, we bought it for $90. We can't get 120. Right? Do you remember?
Yes.
And now it's just like it's changed tenfold.
Yes, and I wish my dad never sold that.
Oh, yeah. I know.
If I knew what I knew today.
Hold on to real estate.
Yeah,
you always make money.
My dad actually gave me that listing so that I can just start getting some sign calls at the process. And we threw it up at a very expensive price point, and we ended up selling it. But yeah, it's a good funny story. Glad you brought that up. Good memories. Yeah, so it's crazy out there. Like it's just it's
I'll be
insane.
honest though, I'd like to be able to say, hey, to that tenant, you're coming from 15,000 feet, like you brought up. Let's put you in 40. But so it's getting to be very difficult to be able to help people.
Right.
And that's honestly a sad thing for me, because we never had these issues up until the last 3 or 4 years. And so, like you said, we need to put pressure on somebody like the municipalities, the province, somebody to release. You can't let in, we let in 400,000 people a year now into this country.
Yeah.
250,000 show up to the GTA somehow, somewhere.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
where they end up.
Even if they end up going somewhere else, they end up coming back.
Yeah, they get in their car, they drive here, right?
Yes, they hear about it, they know about it, they
Right.
find out, they start renting, but what do? They start investing into our markets right away.
It's affecting your business now, because I know you're fighting for listings every day, probably, right?
Yes, of course.
And it's affecting
It's a
our
hustle.
business too. We have to do, we're doing less volume to try to make the same money, and all we're doing now is raising rates and raising it's not, we need to get more of a happy medium. I think vacancies need to be, in our business, a healthy number would be somewhere around 3 to 5%.
Yes.
Where you can
Of
have
course.
some activity. Some buildings are going to sell, because when a building stays long, like I remember, when I first took over a portfolio a long time ago, back 20 years ago, for a large company, Fortune 500 company, we started doing that portfolio. They started to sell buildings, because when that product stays empty for some time, then people start to make decisions, say, okay, well, maybe we own a little bit too much of this product in this area. We're going to sell some. So it helps different sectors of the business, and it allows that a lot of those buyers were young, prominent businesses getting in where they did well and they wanted to own their own building. We can't even do that anymore. It's getting harder and harder to do that because they just don't come to the market. So even if the guy has a very reputable business making big money, he can't buy.
Do you know of any future industrial parks that are going to start getting established?
Yes, there is some stuff slated. We're selling some land. We never talked about this yet. I think we're going to talk about it soon. But there is some. The problem is we're selling land now that's 10 or 15 years out. Mm-hmm. That land needs to come into the process quicker.
It's got to be out 5 years.
Yes, and then we can plan better.
Right.
But because there is slated stuff. Well, Vaughan doesn't have a whole bunch of land. Period. I think you know that.
Correct.
Whether it's housing or industrial.
But then we got to talk about water supply or sewage supply, right?
Yeah.
And
Capacities.
Capacity.
Yeah. Now I'm not an expert on that, and I don't pretend to be. But there's got to be a way, because how are other big cities in the world coping with this issue?
Correct. I agree.
There's got to be a way. I was just in Boston over the weekend.
It's the only way that you can really fix the issues that are outstanding with the housing crisis, and now even in the commercial crisis. We're talking, it's a crisis. There's people that are in need to establish their business, to continue scaling their business, to continue growing their business, but there's not enough space out there for them.
But that's the other thing too. So if the guy can't grow in space, and he needs space, you don't always need space. Even in our businesses, as your brokerage got bigger and bigger, you needed space, right?
Right.
To grow. So if these, especially in the warehousing end, if they can't,
well, height is so important in the warehousing.
But they're going to just raise their costs, and those costs get turned over to the consumer.
Yeah.
So it starts to get more and more expensive.
Yeah, it's a ripple effect, right?
Yeah,
it goes down the chain line.
But it stops at one place, and it stops at the consumer.
Correct.
And that's what I think you're seeing with your grocery bill. Go buy a new car. Anything that you do today is significantly more than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, I attest to that for sure.
Enjoying this episode? Subscribe to our channel and leave us a comment down below to let us know what you want to learn next. Make sure you're following our Instagram and TikTok to stay up to date on our new episodes every Friday.
I want to talk about a little bit of the current interest rates
Sure.
on the commercial side of things. What are you seeing out there regarding rates on commercial side of things?
We follow the res. The res market is the largest market in real estate. Period.
Right? Well, Toronto's a huge everything channels through real estate for us, right?
And res is where it starts, right?
Yeah.
So we're always a couple percentage points higher than you guys. Mm-hmm. Okay, and it's not so much just the rate. It's the qualification to get approved is significantly more in the industrial, commercial, retail world, office, our whole sector, which we call commercial ICI Realty, is so on land. Number one, the banks, the big lending institutions, they don't lend it on it at all. Pretty well, period. So now you get into industrial, commercial, retail properties, office. They do lend on them with very strict guidelines. A lot of times they want 50% or 40% down on those properties. So you need to put a very, very, and that's another thing why they've held so well. You don't see many going to power of sale.
You don't, right? Because there's a big downstroke on them.
Yeah, because when a guy puts half his money into a deal, it's very rare that he walks away from it. Right, he's going to do whatever he can to hold on to that.
And it makes it more affordable for that person to cover those payments.
Exactly. So what he was usually paying in rent is now covering a mortgage.
Yes.
Now
he's paying himself.
But where rents are going and where they're headed, because we're doing a project, 2025, 2026. We're bringing about 650,000 square feet to the market.
Ooh, that's big.
In Vaughan.
Yeah.
So the Keel and Highway 7 area.
Yeah.
Our projected rents are going to be starting at $26 to $30 a square foot, somewhere in that range over a 5-year period. So they're not going down, guys. And the fact that they're not going down is that it's going to be tougher and tougher to make these payments, obviously, right?
Yeah.
So the bank is following suit, saying, "Hey, you know what? We need this amount of money down." They want to make sure that they have a high end of security. The bank doesn't want to be in the real estate business.
They don't. Yeah, no. They want to just make sure that they're providing and lending out their money, that you're making those payments. They want to see you make those payments. It's the landlords, right? So if you own that building, in your opinion right now, do you feel, and I don't want this to be a biased opinion. I want you to. I know that you specialize in commercial, and I know a lot of your investment is in commercial. If you were somebody who had some liquid cash ready to make an investment move, would you advise somebody who's listening to this show right now to either purchase a commercial or industrial space, whatever that means, but most likely commercial or industrial unit, or would you consider dabbling or preferably have them move their money into residential?
Okay, well, it's a very difficult question to answer just because, there's always what I call a uniqueness to real estate deals. So, if you get a house at the right number, there's money to make on resident. And I know I've made money in residential real estate too.
Yeah.
Especially the condo market, I did very well. Over time, we bought condos and they went up significantly, and then we sold them. So there's money to make on both sides of that. Mm-hmm. I think it all depends on you as a consumer, what kind of money you have to invest. So if I had less money to invest, I would go the res way. I think everybody starts that way, and then they filter themselves into a balanced portfolio. So it's easier to buy a $650,000 condo, residential condo, than to buy a small industrial unit at $1.2 million, which is pretty well the starting figures now.
And that's not getting you a big space.
And that's not getting you a big space because they're trading at $600 a square foot. So and this is what I'm trying to say. So my thing is, you have to start somewhere. And I think that probably 90% of the people start in the res, and that's me included. I started with res properties. I think there's a big upside. It's you got to put, how do they say? You got to put some skin in the game. Once you get that going, things start to happen.
Yeah, and I agree with you for sure. And I think if you're just starting out within the business of investing into real estate, and this is all new for you, you're probably going to start dabbling into like pre-construction or any of that. That's what most people start.
What do you put down on a condo? $40,000, and then you're in, right?
You're in. Your money's going to be held there. It's going to liquidate
4 or
for
5 years.
That's
and then,
right. Grows up with inflation. You either choose to rent it or flip it. But now the laws are changing on that too as well. But I taxes and stuff like that, and HST even on the assignment side of things.
Got to rent it for a year. There's still things you can do, but you could still make money.
Yeah, no, for sure, and there's definitely opportunities out there. I personally feel, and I'm more residential heavy, and I want to start diversifying a little bit where I get into a little bit more commercial industrial space. The reason being, what frustrates me on the residential side is the eviction process. Evicting tenants on the residential side, if that tenant is not paying you, becomes a very hefty process where you're putting a lot of your time, and we know time is money, and the amount of distraction that you can put in to try to evict somebody who's not paying you rent becomes a longer time frame. On the industrial commercial side, it becomes a lot easier. Can you elaborate on the process to evict somebody on the commercial industrial side?
I don't want to get in trouble politically here, but we have a government where
okay.
I'm not in favor of, and
let's make it known.
If you notice, I'm wearing blue. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah,
I'm a blue guy. I love the blue party. So these I think that they've made some very, very serious restrictions to landlords in the residential market. You brought it up, and now we opened that can of worms. That's a big reason why I sold my residential portfolio, and that was the biggest reason. I know a lot of people
are not investing, period, in Canada alone, and
they're scared.
Because they're scared and they want to move it.
Now, rent control and issues; these are issues that happen in a lot of big metros. Let's be straight here. Like if you went to New York, they have rent control. If you went to Chicago, they have rent control. So the big cities in the North American market are subject to rent control just because no regular people would be able to afford the rents that the landlords would charge. So you do have to have some restrictions. Now, I believe ours, when you sign a residential lease and it looks like a phone book, it's a little scary. It's scary as a landlord, and I think it even scares the tenant.
Yeah.
So they are a little too one-sided, in my opinion, my professional opinion. I am not a big fan of the residential world because of that lease. Hopefully, going forward, they make some changes to that. I think there are people already working on that.
Yeah, and expediting the process.
And it's too long, right?
It's too long of a process. Sometimes now the backlog is 6-7 months.
And you got to basically sell a property to get rid of a tenant. Like it's if you have that troublesome tenant that's constantly late, but not late enough where you evict them, but they're what you call like a pain in your butt almost every month. But they're what we call professional tenants.
Yes.
They
Agreed.
move from space to space. They know what they're doing. Now, if you flip over to the industrial, commercial, retail, office side of things, we wouldn't put up with that. You're going to get a letter. Then if you don't abide by that letter, we're going to make a call to a bailiff and we're going to lock you out and all your employees. And there's going to be a lot of embarrassing things that happen for you as the owner of that business if you don't pay the rent.
Yeah.
So let's say, I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen because, of course, people get challenged in every aspect of life. And sometimes it hits the commercial world as well. But I think it's less and less in commercial leasing than it is in residential leasing because there's a lot of different factors. A guy could lose his job and you can't, we live in a place that's very cold in the winter. You can't put a family in the middle of the street in January, so.
And I respect those rules and I get it.
So there has to be, but I think they have to balance the scale. The scales were maybe too much before in the landlord favor, not enough on the tenant side. Now what they've done is they've gone all the way 90 degrees. They've got to fix that. I think they got to get back to where the landlord has a few more rights.
I agree, and the reason is because they don't want to. They don't want to deal with the problem.
That's
so what
right.
they're doing is throwing the problem to the landlord,
Well,
right? Because if these people, if tenants end up on the street, then they're going to government assistance and.
We're not going to get into the political stuff.
I hear you, but no, I know. Maybe we got to spin this a little bit more.
Yeah, we got to change topics because
we may have to at this point in time. So let's talk about a little bit of something that I'm kind of dealing with from a certain perspective in my industry, and I don't know if you're feeling this being you have a very large brokerage as well, where you have a lot of real estate agents that work for your brokerage, and what I'm finding is that it's different from when I was started in the business 20 years ago, 19 years ago, whatever that number may be. I used to go to the office every single day. I believe in going to the office every single day. I think it's important. There's a lot of networking. There's a lot of things that happen and less distractions for myself personally. But I find
Ditto to that.
Yeah.
Ditto to that for me.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm finding today, especially because of COVID, there's a lot of realtors that don't show up to the office, and there's a lot of working from home, and not just in our industry, in many industries, office space is becoming less and less and less of, right? And I know, and I still know after the pandemic, I have friends or neighbors that still only go into the office twice a week, and majority of that time is still spent working from home. What's the future, in your opinion, of office space?
Okay, so it's funny you mentioned this question. Because I had a call on the way up here. So of all, like we talked about all the positive and how well we're doing in industrial and how well we're doing on land and how well commercial spaces and retail spaces are doing, what we didn't talk about was the spaces that are giving us the most issues.
Yes.
So office space is the most impacted from the pandemic in our business. It's very slow. There's high vacancy numbers as renewals are coming up. So let me give you an example. That law firm that is on First Canadian Place that was renting 20,000 square feet is now going to 10,000 square feet. So it's actually getting worse, not better, if you can believe that. Because, see, those leases are coming up. And like you said, we have 4 offices. I don't need all that space anymore because even in my business, people adapted to working from home. So And with all the new technology like Zoom calls and FaceTime,
But even working from your car, mobile, everything's just all sent. There's no printing of papers. You don't need a photocopy
right
no more.
Now,
right?
our era, we're kind of
we used to do presentations back in the day. When's the last time you've ever gone to somebody to do a presentation?
I just listed a farm, okay, with 5 people. We did everything on a Zoom. Yeah. I've never done that in my life. You know, we went to the farm. They didn't even meet us there.
Which is moving towards the way of the future, right? And I'm sure all 4 of those people were probably even working from home.
They're all professionals in their own right. They know how to get on a Zoom call. It happened to be, they're in our age group.
Yeah.
And we're like the end of that era.
We are.
The next generation, like the millennials.
You will not see any.
No, and you're going to see, I think you're going to see very smaller office spaces, maybe with larger meeting rooms. We're seeing that, like, I think the stat I read, the city of Toronto has the most available office square footage ever.
Wow.
In vacancies.
Wow.
At the moment.
Wow, that's big.
So where we talked about 0.05% of industrial vacancies,
which is a great point.
This is probably more somewhere around 25%. 20 to 25. So I don't know the exact number. I'm not a big office guy. We do have office guys in our system and in our team, but they're not having a very good time with it right now. There is some talk about taking some office space and converting it into the condo residential world, which may affect your business. We're finding the core office is very bad and a lot of vacancies. Suburban office, not as much. We're finding that there is still people in, you know what it was? We really didn't have a lot of office space in suburbia, but now that's all, that would maybe running at 10% vacancy. So it's not, and even when it was very, very busy, it was very rare to have an office building 100% leased. There's always a little bit of changeover. You have a tenant renovating, you need to move them. There's always issues, and it's a different business, right?
Yes.
But their rates are significantly down as well.
So there's companies out there, though, that provide, and what I'm finding is now there's this new trend, which wasn't around when we were coming up, is where they're just making mobile office spaces available.
Yeah.
Like Hub, Intelligence Office.
Yeah, so you rent a whole floor.
Or you think you get a membership or something like that.
Yeah.
And then
it's a new business.
It's a new business model throughout that.
Yeah, so for instance, your home base is in Greenwich, Connecticut, for instance. But you're opening a Toronto office, but I don't want to have a big office space. So I have what's called a joint phone system. They have a secretary at the front or an assistant at the front.
Yeah. You
lease out a boardroom and you pay for it. Yeah. So they can set up a meeting. They take your calls. Your calls go to your emails. It's all set up. It's professional office space. It's working, but again, not enough to fill all these gaps. Now they're hoping. Like there's a bunch of people I've been talking to at different brokerages that they believe, look, you close the office space. It's not just the office space that suffers. What about all those restaurants? What about that? What's really suffering is, did you ever hear of the Path, down into the subway system where they have the Path and they have all those retail stores and they're not getting the traffic. So that guy that's selling shirts, for instance,
right,
he can't sell as many shirts because he doesn't get as many people through there as he did, back 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So they're hoping, I think, that they see an increase. I know some positives in the market are, like, for instance, the banks were one of the big and the last guys to send their people back to work. But I know that they ordered a bunch of people back to work now. So I think you're going to see more and more people coming, and you're hoping that what I think they're hoping was, hey, we're not going to build a bunch of new office space at the moment. Hopefully over the next few years, we fill up our vacancies and we get it back to a level where it should be, right? Your guess is as good as mine. I really don't know if that's going to work.
I don't know if it is.
It may never work.
It may not. That may not change, right? The future of office space is.
You got to look at this too, right?
I think as a development side of things, if I was getting zoned from a municipality point of view, and I had a piece of land that it was a zone for an office building, man, would I probably try to fight to have that rezoned?
And they'd probably be more receptive to that now than they were before.
Yeah.
We talked a bit about conversions. Now, I've talked to some specialized guys in the U.S. markets that do those types of conversions. The problem is, our square foot price, believe it or not, on condos, although we talk, it's went up a lot in the res world. The truth is, we're very cheap compared to the rest of the world. Our prices are very cheap. So, in order to do this conversion, the bottom number on a square foot price has to be significantly higher than what we're currently getting in premium markets like Yorkville, Bloor Street, the Lake.
Right.
We're not getting that. We're actually, to be honest with you, Nick, what the guy told me is we're not even close.
There's still so much more room.
So to do the conversion is so expensive, the numbers won't work. So because they would have jumped, there's some big investment funds and equity funds that own, and insurance companies that own these office buildings, that I think they would have been all over that already. So I don't see it happening yet. It may get there as things continue to go up, but it's not there yet. So I heard that that's really off the table at the moment about doing conversions into condos from office buildings.
I think it's a good strategy. I think it's something that probably is going to change, because I don't think we're going to see that kind of space start to fill up really quick.
No.
And people are just, listen, Paul, when I started out in the business, there was a lot of face-to-face interaction, right? Nothing was accessible. When we were dealing with offers, I wanted to get your eye gestures. I wanted to get body movements. I want to see the nodding. If I brought you a deal that was a low ball originally, or didn't have your closing date that was going to match, I wanted to know that it upset you.
But
right?
your client wanted that.
And the client wanted it.
But what I'm getting now is the client doesn't want it.
No. It expedites things. And there's a good part about it, too, as well, is that you're
And
able to make more deals a lot more
maybe
quicker.
they don't want to tell you their emotions like they did.
They don't want to show you all that stuff, for sure. They got a lot smarter,
Yeah.
too, and a lot more knowledgeable, right? Because they're
It's easier to say no on a camera to a guy in front,
or over a phone.
right?
Yeah.
I'm a big guy, and I'm still thinking about all my young guys. I tell them to get in their car and go, and they look at me like honestly sideways. But I'm
like
still,
they've seen an alien or something.
I'm still,
like, what do you mean? Get in
what
my
are you
car?
talking about? Like,
I gotta go actually meet the client.
Yeah,
I know.
and that's the way we did things. I still personally do things that way. It works with my era and my age group of clientele. It works, but yeah, the younger ones coming up, for sure, there's a difference.
Yeah.
Paul,
it's this has been exciting. This is why I like to have you on, is because a lot of that we speak about here is majority residential, but making you come in and talk about the commercial sector makes things relevant for people listening to the show. And I think it's important for people to understand all aspects of real estate, including industrial commercial, because there's many components into getting yourself within the market and investing within the market. A lot of this is about educating consumers to how to start building that pathway to owning at least your own investments. And industrial commercial space, I want to start moving into that sector a little bit more too as well, and it's very important.
You know what? It's so they sound like different worlds, but they're very tied in. The markets really do tie into each other, and you're 100% right. We talked a little bit about investing today. You always want to balance a portfolio, just like you do in a mutual fund on your RRSP portfolio.
Yeah.
You don't want to have one of everything.
Yeah, you don't want to be so tech heavy,
No,
or you don't want you want
exactly. And it's the same in real estate. You may want to own a piece of land. You may want to own some commercial, industrial, and you definitely want to own some residential. We all usually own residential almost immediately because we need somewhere to live.
Yeah.
Right? So we're already in that market. And a lot of your money is in your personal home, most people, right? Most people's fortunes are in their house.
Yes.
So to move on from that, yeah, I think you have to expand, and you have to make a balanced portfolio, just like you would within your RSPs. You have to do the same in real estate portfolios.
Right. So I think we've come to the same common denominator here, is that the future of real estate in Toronto looks very bright. Would you agree?
Absolutely. A market like Toronto, never will be down for long. I think the last time we talked about down markets. It was very a doom and gloom.
But what did we say? These were the opportunities where people are going to strike
things
now.
are already more expensive than they were 6 months ago.
6 months ago.
And
right.
I'm going to tell you, going forward, everybody starts talking about interest rates and this and that. There's just, guys, there's a lot of people in Toronto and in the GTA market. It's never going to be cheap, and it's not going to get cheaper. It's only going to go up. That's my prediction.
And I want to end off with that. But, Paul, that's a really good prediction. I would thank you for coming on the show. This has been wonderful. Can't wait to air this one out, but it was a pleasure having you on board again.
Thanks, Nick.
No problem.
Looking to buy or sell? Call a team you can trust. Don't believe me? Our Google reviews say it all. Put us on your lawn, your house will be gone. TheOPteam.com.